is Kyle Bazzi from Bill Highway. We're going to get started here. Sorry for the tardiness. We were having a few audio issues there, but very excited to bring you this webinar tonight to talk about the payroll deductions challenge that's going around many public labor unions in the states here. And we have an incredible guest with us, Mr. John Dixon, the General Secretary at the New South Wales Teachers Federation over there across the pond, to talk to us about the journey they've gone through in Australia's journey through payroll deductions quite some time ago, and where they're at now, and hopefully we can tease out just a lot of the challenges, things that they think they knew and they wish they knew now, and hopefully lend that knowledge to all of you. We're having a little bit of audio issues with Ron Krause, our senior advisor here at Bill Highway, so if he does join midway, you'll hear him peep in. He used to be the chief of staff at the American Federation of Teachers as well. But without any further ado, I would like to welcome to the webinar Mr. John Dixon. John, thanks so much for making the time for us today.
Thank you.
John, I'd love to just have you start. I'd love to have you just start with just some general background on you. What's your journey been like? Obviously, your role, and kind of just a little bit of background there at the New South Wales Teacher Federation.
Okay. As Carl said, I'm the General Secretary of the New South Wales Teachers Federation. The Teachers Federation is the largest affiliate of the Australian Education Union, which is the national union. But basically the branches, the state branches, have the membership systems and control the membership subscriptions, and that's where the action happens. The federal office is more of a secretariat running federal campaigns quite successfully. But we pay capitation fees federally, and we obviously pay fees to each of our 167 local associations. But it's worth pointing out, particularly to Americans, that our locals do not bargain. They're not bargaining units as such. We have a centralised wage fixation system. Where we had one industrial award for school teachers and one industrial award for our technical and further education teachers. So it's quite a centralised system.
Fantastic. And Ron, do we have you on here as well?
Yes, do you hear me?
Great, yes. And everyone, I'd like to introduce, in addition to John Dixon here tonight, we brought in our senior advisor, Mr. Ron Krause. So Ron, I'd love to get a little background on you here, and would love to kind of let you lead the conversation here with John as we go through the information tonight.
That's terrific. Thank you, Kyle. My name is Ron Krause. I'm a senior advisor to Bill Highway. I've worked in the labor movement for about 40 years, even though I'm only about 25 years old. I've worked with communications workers and the Association of Flight Attendants in over 20 years at the American Federation of Teachers. We are faced as a labor movement with some dire events happening as we speak. Republican Congress is coming in with a Republican president. A number of state legislatures are majority Republican, as well as Republican governors. And they are all going to be reading from the same playbook. They are going to be attacking the labor movement because the labor movement is one of the few progressive organizations that traditionally has been well funded and well motivated, and it is in the Republicans' interest to try to silence our progressive efforts. One of the ways they are trying to do that is the elimination of payroll deduction for union dues. They've done it in Michigan. They've done it in Wisconsin. There are a number of bills in state legislatures that we anticipate are likely to pass in 2017. And it might even happen in the federal sector in Congress that President Trump will end up signing for federal employee unions. Our brothers and sisters in Australia have faced similar issues over the years. They have learned from it. And so this is a good opportunity for us to talk to our brother in Australia so that he can tell us the experience that they faced in Australia when they lost payroll deduction, and in subsequent years when they had an ability to get it back, why they said thanks but no thanks. And so it is an important lesson for us as we start facing the challenges that face us in the American trade union movement. So John, we'd love to hear from you in terms of your experiences in Australia. And if our listeners have some questions, there is an ability to type that in, and Kyle or I will try to take a look at that and see how we can answer those questions during the course of this seminar.
Okay.
So John, it's yours.
You. Okay. I've got, as I said, I've 30 years experience in the movement. I started as an organiser for casual and unemployed teachers in the mid-80s. And the interesting thing about that is, of course, casual teachers or temporary teachers or non-permanent teachers or precarious employment don't get payroll deduction and never had payroll deduction. So I suppose my first experience as an organiser was literally fronting people up, getting their money off them direct in cash and giving them a receipt. So it was only later when I became the membership officer of the union that I realised that most of our income into the union really comes from the employer. It's not a direct relationship with our member. It's via the good grace of a government department or a political party. And that's why you're vulnerable. As Lenin said, finances are the lifeblood of the party. At least the Bolsheviks could go and rob banks and trains. As a union movement, we seldom have the opportunity to rob a bank or rob a train, and therefore most unions will, between 90 to 95% of their income comes directly from their members. So the relationship you have with your members is paramount. So I suppose as when I was General Secretary, I've got both front of house experience in terms of being an organiser, but I've also got a fairly extensive experience in terms of the running of a union by its information systems, most of which I'd have to say are very much lacking. And that was one of the things we found. The Federation has lost payroll deductions twice in our history. Once in the 1970s, where a Conservative government suddenly took away, in the midst of a salaries campaign, took away our deductions source, and it took the union 3 years to get that back. And it was only when a Labor government was elected in New South Wales, in the state legislature, did that government promise in their election pitch to teachers that they would restore deductions, give us a preference for unionist clause, and give us access to industrial tribunals. And that was in 1976. But we went 3 years without funds, and in preparing for this, looking back through the records, we started having to cut things like not produce our newspaper, not produce material, cut back the number of officers we had, and basically the organisation almost went bankrupt if it was a corporate sense. But we were slow learners. Our campaign in the 70s was to get deductions at source back. It wasn't to think about new ways of collecting money. So we then rolled on 20 years where another liberal, so what we call liberal government, is actually a conservative government in this country. I know that we've got to be careful with terminology. Basically, they're all Tories. They, in the midst of a salaries campaign, another salaries campaign, industrial campaign, suddenly just before Christmas decided to cut off deductions. I was the acting Deputy Secretary campaigns at that stage and thought, fantastic. The Minister has overplayed her hand. Our members will rally. This dispute's going to be over pretty quickly because she'll have to fold. The membership officer part of me, which was my substanding job, went to the old, then where the Federation was located, went to the 9th floor, which is the top floor, went to the bathroom and threw up because I knew that the double check for the summer vacation wasn't arriving. And my next action was I had to collect all the staff together and basically tell them that if we didn't get an invoice out to every member by the beginning of the school vacation, that when we returned in the middle of January, I would be laying half of them off. And it did focus everyone's attention. In fact, I think some people work like they never worked before. Unfortunately, in that, in terms of the technology, I'd asked my IT manager at the time whether we could recode payroll deduction to generate an invoice. And he said, oh, well, if we transfer all of the code 1s to code 9s, it will generate an invoice to everybody. And we did. The problem was I didn't ask the right questions. The question I should have asked was, how can we convert this back if we need to? When we won about a month later politically, the Minister flipped, settled the salary dispute and restored deductions, not only restored deductions, but paid the back money, which unfortunately meant that our members who had sent us now checks for the union to survive had effectively paid twice. And there was no quick way of refunding that money to them. And that took us another 6 to 12 months to get their money back to them. So we learned that our technology and our systems we had taken for granted. I'm a great believer that membership systems are not merely a financial system. They really are the CRM of a union. They should provide you all your information about members in terms of what their issues are, what they're paying, when they're paying. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but every time a member touches the organisation, we record it, it's stored, and we are working towards using that data to better service our members.
Yeah.
When it took us, that was in 2000, that was in 1994. It then took us another 12 years before we started what we called the switch campaign. We were slow learners. And initially when we lost deductions, the immediate thought was take legal action in the courts, in the Supreme Court, stop it to say they had breached a contract. We paid a lot of expensive lawyers, a lot of money, and we were like addicts. We just wanted the sugar back. We wanted the money back, and we didn't put much effort into thinking we've now been attacked twice. We have to move away from the threat. Move on a decade to 2004, the federal government, the Conservative government, had been in power from 1996. They were now, they had been re-elected for the third time. But this time, the Conservative Prime Minister, who, by the way, his two heroes were Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, got both a majority in the House of Reps and the Senate, which meant that his prize legislation he'd always want to bring in terms of what was called work choices, quite an Orwellian name, would some stage carry and basically move all workers, except for public sector workers, from a state jurisdiction to a federal jurisdiction. And in the federal jurisdiction under the Corporations Act, as opposed to a Trade Union Act, it basically meant there were very few allowable matters in an agreement. They were very much stripped down collective agreements or individual agreements. And there was no disadvantage test, which meant employers, if they could get it through, could basically strip out conditions. And one of the things that was feared would be stripped out was payroll deductions. And by this stage, I was a deputy secretary of the union, and I decided there's no way I'm going to live through this a third time. And we started to build what we called the switch campaign. And it took us 12 months to build that switch campaign.
So John, let me, so we got a couple slides here that might be well suited. It's kind of like a rapid fire questions, and then I would love to, at the end, the switch campaign that we can share with everybody as we jump into that. So as you just mentioned, and I think these are applicable to the people listening here today, so what happened in Australia to force that kind of change in labor?
An aggressive, ideological federal government who basically wanted to break the unions. And one way of breaking the unions is the public sector unions in particular, is control their sources of income.
Got you. So when we're thinking about the political environment here, for people that are listening that are either considering this threat as a possibility, you know, what kind of advice would you have for people that are looking at it? You know, how big of a change, and you're saying this obviously is one of the worst days. What kind of advice would you have for what kind of change this is to their organization?
Move quickly, use fear, and make sure you've got systems in place that can cope with possibly a 30 to 40% loss of your membership base. That's the scenario you've got to run on. We have an example in Australia where our Victorian colleagues, which is another popular state in Australia, they elected a Conservative Premier of the state. He instantly took deductions of source away and cut 2,000 teachers off the payroll.
Wow.
They lost, in the space of 2 months, lost 30% of their membership base. With no income.
Now, John, you threw out a number there, and we just had somebody ask the question. You said be prepared to lose how much of your membership base?
30 to 40%.
30 to 40%. Wow. So when we're thinking about New South Wales,
the Victorians, it took them a decade to recover.
Wow. Wow. So we're going to be going over your switch campaign and showing everybody, you know, what New South Wales did. But you touched on it in that story around Christmas. And John, when you and I had talked before, I asked you the question, if there's some kind of popular U.S. song that says, if I only knew what I did then, now, how much better off I would be. So when you think about New South Wales responding, you know, to these unfavorable political moves, what are some key highlights? You said move fast, some of the technology changes. You know, what advice would you give to people that are going through this in the U.S. now? Maybe just expound upon that a little bit more. How would you advise them to respond? You know, in kind of the sense of that you would now compared to what you did before.
The first thing I would do is look at your rules and see what you can and can't do under your rules. A union's rules are its business operations, and that you, in the words of a famous friend of mine at the National Union of Teachers in the UK, when Thatcher came for the National Union of Teachers, she didn't send in police and flying pickets like she did with the miners. She sent in the lawyers and to tie people up into legal action, which then the only people who do well out of that are the lawyers. The union doesn't do all that well, and you then spend a whole lot of the union's money in court case after court case. You also need to make sure your systems are robust, that you can flick a switch to say, well, we're no longer doing payroll deduction. We're now going to do it by direct debit with banks. We're going to have a direct relationship with our member, not via a major adversary. Because in the end, when you're a public sector worker, your major adversary and your biggest risk factor is the government of the day. And the Teachers Federation has in its rules that it is not politically aligned and cannot affiliate with any political party. We are a highly political union, but our politics are around teachers and public education for students. And therefore we don't owe any political party any allegiance, whether they're on the left or the right. And it gives us a sense of independence, and if you're independent, how do you fund that independence? And it's from robust financial systems.
Yeah.
And John, this is Ron. In addition to the technology issues that you had to deal with in order to collect the money, the union dues money, are there other organizational changes that you had to do within the New South Wales Teachers Association that changed the priority of how one allocates staff, and in terms of priorities? Did you change from what we would call here from a service model to an organizing model? Did you make sure that staff interacted with union members far more?
The Australian Council of Trade Unions has run on an organising model for some years. The two most successful unions in the country are the teachers and the nurses. We're still growing, and we've never accepted the dichotomy between organising and servicing. It's a continuum, and the good unions both service their members and organise their members. They don't do one or the other. Now the balance might change at various times. I think for most of the organisation, it just wanted magic to happen, and magic doesn't happen in unions all that often. We got a bit lucky. By the way, I sacked the first IT. In fact, I've sacked a number of IT managers over the years. But it took us probably 8 years to go and find and implement a decent membership system, CRM system, that allowed us to go with confidence to our members and say, if you fill this form in to do direct debit via your bank, it'll replicate payroll deduction. You will not notice the difference. And for most of our members who've switched, that's the case. We have one ace in our sleeve, is that there is at that stage was a teachers credit union, now called the Teachers Mutual Bank, that had at that stage not direct debit, but what we call periodic payment. It would take out amounts of money and pay teachers bills on a regular basis for teachers if they had the funds in their account. So we used periodic payments, and we knew that existed. We had that in our system. But direct debit and auto credit, and at that stage, if you think about the mid-90s, online was not really all that online. We had to invest a lot of money and a lot of time in redesigning our systems, and it's best to redesign your systems when you're not in crisis.
Yeah, that's huge, John. You talked to us quite a bit about that around moving quickly, and it can be a struggle. And I think it kind of plays into this next question. If you're looking at the slides, folks, is what were some of the initial reactions, John, from leaders in the organization, and what were some of the challenges that presented in terms of moving quickly on a new problem that maybe they didn't they haven't encountered before?
I suppose at the time as the membership officer, a crisis makes you the centre of attention and gives you probably more power than you've ever had, because suddenly we're thinking about laying off half of our staff. It also meant we put rules in place in the union that meant that we always had 6 months of reserves of running the union. So in place in New South Wales, if we were to have a catastrophic event, we lost representation rights, or another union came and took all of our members, the union could operate at full steam in a full campaign for 6 months without laying anyone off. So we've got strong financial reserves now, which we didn't have in the 70s, and we certainly didn't have in the 90s. And I'd argue that our strong financial reserves are now based on the fact that we are not under threat from any government to turn the tap off or even kink the hose.
Yeah. And John, we got some questions coming in from the audience here. Dave asked, so that we asked about the leaders, but what were some of the initial reactions from the rank and file membership, and how did you start messaging this to the organization?
The initial reaction, when we did the switch campaign, we purposely used the same imagery as the ACTU's Your Rights at Work campaign. We argued that it was the employer, the government, was affecting their right to be effectively represented. I don't know whose entry that was. So initially, fear, loathing of the other side, but after about 6 to 8 months, complacency. And we found that with the switch campaign when we set targets. Initially, it went very, very well, but after a while, there are a whole lot of institutional factors that organisers want to get back to real organising. Leadership wants to get back to running real campaigns, as I was often told. And I used to have to answer them, well, if we don't run a switch campaign, there'll be no real, because half of you won't be here. So yeah. You've got a window of opportunity. You've also got, we found a switch campaign, our members started saying, like, well, we're not going to switch right now. It hasn't happened. The end of the world hasn't happened. The end of the world is not nigh. I'll switch when we're under attack. Where we were trying to get the people, look, switch now before it all happens, and you protect yourself and you protect the union. That eventually wears off. So you do have a window of opportunity right now. It's probably the biggest threat to the world since Adolf Hitler.
Yeah.
Without mentioning anyone's name.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're all nodding our heads on this side. And so, John, kind of going on the members, and earlier you had alluded to, and everyone listening, John keeps referencing the switch campaign, and on the next couple slides, we're actually going to dive into what that switch campaign is, and we have some really good content around that. But John, I got 2 more questions left for you before we dive into the switch campaign. And so we talked about, kind of messaging it to the members, using fear, and not waiting for the crisis, but getting ahead of the crisis, because you don't want to be switching all of this during, that actual crisis. But what's the impact on the members and the services they receive? I mean, if you're losing, 30% of membership for various reasons, what's the end result on the members, and how can people listening today, how can they use that to try to get people to be more motivated to make a change?
Basically, if you lose 30% of your income, you get into a downward spiral. You have to start cutting positions, you have to start cutting services, you have to pull back on your media budget, your communications budget, you have to go to a bare bones. What is now a luxury we can no longer afford. And so a whole lot of other programs start disappearing that some activists find is the reason why the reason why they were involved in the union in the first place. So you start alienating bits of your membership.
Great.
And it changes the value proposition.
So John, one more question before we jump into the switch campaign to share that with everybody. So you kind of walked us through a path. You know, you guys lost payroll deductions there. The culture changed, the mindset changed. You talked about, you know, how obviously scary and bad it was for a given period. But then a few years ago, or quite a few years ago, you guys were actually offered back payroll deductions by the government and you turned it down. Can you talk us through that story? And now we're kind of like on the other end of this. What kind of drove that decision?
I suppose it happened to us twice. We didn't want it to happen a third time. We were fearful that when we were all forced to move to the federal jurisdiction because of the Corporations Act, that payroll deductions would not be there, so we had to get in front of the curve. At no stage did they ever offer it back. And if they had offered it back, although in the Australian environment, because of the sovereign states, two other teacher unions, the South Australians and the Queenslanders, and ultimately the Victorians, who offered payroll deduction back, and all said no. They would rather have a direct relationship with their members than have that threat over them again. So it has to be a permanent change. When we did the switch campaign, one of the first things I did was rip up all of the membership forms and take away the option of joining by payroll deduction. We decided to go cold turkey. So every new member had to join by direct debit or auto credit or online. They could not join by PRP, even though the government still offered it to us. So it was a conscious decision by us never to return to a former existence.
And John, once the government eliminated payroll deduction for public employee unions, did you see the private sector employers also trying to do that, following the lead of the government?
Couldn't really comment. I think there's a whole lot of more conservative unions that still have quite cosy, in the private sector, quite cosy arrangements with employers to take payroll deductions from all their employees, whether they're members or not. Sometimes people don't even know they're a member of the union because it's a direct relationship in an enterprise agreement between particular unions in the retail sector, and the unionism in Australia has dropped to almost American levels from the 1970s to now, after concerted attacks on the ability to have enforceable awards and agreements. So I'm not well versed in private sector unions in this country.
All right, so you know, folks, as you got more questions, please just send them on in, and we'd be happy to answer those. We're going to shift the presentation now to what you have heard John reference as the switch campaign. And John, if you're following on the slides as well, give us a higher level. What was this switch campaign? And talk to us kind of about the mindset that was going through the organization, as it could lend some advice to the folks that are sitting in here with us on the webinar.
Well, when I started as the membership officer, we had a preference for unionist clause, which meant if there were two people going for a job and they were both equal, in the end the union member got the position over the non-member. And at the point of redundancy, the non-member got made redundant and the union member didn't. That was withdrawn in the 1990s, and in a way, a preference for unionist clause and payroll deduction is lazy unionism, to be blunt. because I can remember going into various universities and walking out with large bags of money because everyone joined. You didn't actually have to sell the concept of why they were a member of the union. So in terms of background, we started moving away from that sort of mentality, the fact that we actually have to go out and recruit members. We have to organise and energise and probably radicalise the next generation of teachers. So we committed to a program called the New Educators Network, and we developed a program to focus on getting young teachers into the union. So that was a 10-year program running as well. So we had a mindset around recruitment, and we had a mindset about if we're going to recruit people, how is it easy for them to pay? So we started looking at online as opposed to physical bits of money or checks. And we know that in our history now, the people who are likely to become unfinancial are the cash or invoice payers, because the bill sits on the fridge, the refrigerator, with all the electricity bill and the gas bill and whatever, and you're competing, your invoice is competing with all the other invoices on the refrigerator. So our move was always to move people away from cash payment to easy online payment, to direct debit, to auto credit, prepay, any way. We take any way of money except payroll deduction, except for one group of members and one group only, and that was our technical and further education teachers who work part-time at night and might work over several different colleges. Their membership fees are structured on an hourly basis. 50 cents an hour to be a member of the union is a very easy sell, and we suddenly were able to jump those sort of people who aren't generally join teaching unions by 3,000 or 4,000 members in 1 year, because we had a very easy sell of saying you're protected for 50 cents an hour, and the only way that can be delivered across various is with an employer. So it's the only group we've kept. But because of the government attacks in that further education sector, that membership is now dropping considerably. So we just took the option away. We just decided that we would go cold turkey, and it focused everyone's mind on getting the money in by different means.
So you say cold turkey, and as I switch to the next slide, we shed a little bit of light on this, but as people are listening here and having to message a lot of this information to the rest of the organizations that they're in, talk to us about the risk of reliance on payroll deductions. I think that this hasn't been a topic because it's never been a challenge or even an idea that people have had to think about in the labor unions here in the U.S. But what's the risk of reliance on payroll deductions? Kind of flipping the script a little bit, like you're saying, going cold turkey. How do we look at it in a different way?
Sorry, I've missed a fair bit of that. Sorry.
I was saying, John, that, what can you kind of talk to us about, from your guys' point of view, what the risk of reliance on payroll deductions is, and kind of talk us through that, and how you guys kind of look at it now, now that you're on the other side of this kind of crisis.
No one in this union would ever suggest, if the current membership officer walked into the General Secretary's office and said, got a great idea, let's do a deal with our adversaries in government for them to take our members' money directly out of their pay and give it to us, they'd get thrown out of my office. When there's no way we'll never go back to payroll deduction.
And John, there are some unions here. There are unions here in the States that base their dues structure on a percentage of one's income. And they're reliant on the payroll office of the employer to make those calculations. Is that an issue that any of the public employee unions faced in Australia?
Yes, but there's a way around that. And various state branches in the AU have that similar type of thing and live by direct debit and auto credit still without payroll deduction. It is possible. We have a much simpler fee structure. Our fees are set at 0.76 of the top of the common incremental scale, the salary scale of teachers, which is where the majority of our members are. So it doesn't matter whether you're a first-year art teacher or a principal of a large high school, every permanent teacher pays the same amount of money. And it's a lot cleaner and a lot easier. And you can run the philosophical line that everyone gets the same level of service, everyone gets the same price. And a principal who says in some unions, I pay double what a beginning teacher pays, I want double the respect, I want double the service, I want double the effort of the union. We just say, no, everyone pays the same. So a permanent teacher in New South Wales will pay about $800 a year to be a member of the union. A temporary teacher, someone who's on a long-term block that doesn't have permanency, pays 2/3 of that rate, and a casual teacher or a relief teacher pays 1/3 of what a full-time teacher would pay. Even though our subscription table looks complicated, it's relatively easy to administer for a bank or for the individual member.
Great. And so, John, you know, I think this is your switch campaign. We've talked a little bit about the messaging and how you need to not only you know, create the narrative for your staff and for your team that's going to be organizing, but then also the members. Now, on the other side of it, and you've alluded to this quite a bit here, it's also the infrastructure that needs to exist from a technology and financial payment side. So the switch campaign, and if you're looking at the slide, folks, the payment method breakdown before the switch, and we're going to go over what your guys' goals were, John. But talk to us about where you were at before the switch campaign and how you guys view those numbers and where you wanted to get to.
We were overly ambitious with our targets, and we still haven't met them 10 years on. So I wouldn't want to think that it's an easy process. But between the time we lost deductions the second time and the time we ran the switch campaign, we obviously had payroll deductions back quite quickly. We worked on the technology to do all this. And other people won't have to do that now because there are different ways of doing the technology. It's a lot easier. It's a lot more web-based. Web was very much in its infancy. Online was very much in its infancy. But at the start of the process in 2005, 64% of our members were payroll deduction, but that represented 84% of our membership subscription. And our membership subscription represents about 95% of the union's income. And most of that, in the public sector union, is spent on salaries. So one of the big things here is we always look at the top 5 lines of expenditure. What are they? And it's generally staff and officers, campaigns. So if the money's not there, how do you run campaigns? How do you keep the staff? We were lucky in that 5% of our members were coded as direct debit from the Teachers Credit Union already, and we did a direct deal with them that they wouldn't charge us any fees. almost a third of our members were coded as invoice, i.e. they paid by phone that stage, VPay online via a website, which was in 2005 was a little bit better, or they paid old-fashioned, they paid by cash or by cheque. So we were beholden to the employer with that amount of our members. And that 64% were basically our permanent long-term members. Most of our invoice people were casual and temporary teachers who didn't know they were working from year to year. We set an incredibly ambitious target. We wanted to move 60% of our members in a year and a half to from PRD to direct debit or auto credit. So we had to go and ask people for their bank account. We had to go and ask them for their credit card. And there is a reluctance of some members of giving you that information. And our target in 2007 was 90%. We still haven't made that in 2017. We're getting close, but we haven't made it yet. The campaign was incredibly good in its first year. All the organisers had targets. That was their campaign. It wasn't salaries, it wasn't class sizes, it was to switch people. To have meetings that's primary aim was to sit down and tell people, here were the threats, here was the solution. Do you want your union to be beholden to government, or do you want it to be independent? Do you want it to have a union that can protect you legally and industrially and professionally? That was basically the pitch.
And John, we just had a good question come in that you kind of just touched on, and I don't know what you guys faced over there for this, but Justin asked, in the U.S., we rely on the employer to provide the full list of possible members, what we call the bargaining unit. How do you know what your list is? And how did you guys handle that now that you mentioned you had to go out and actually get the credit card and personal information from some of these members?
Yeah. So how do we get the what?
So what Justin's saying is, in the U.S., the employer provides the list, the full list of possible members. It's what they call the bargaining unit. How did you guys know what your list was?
Because we don't bargain for non-members. You've got to be a financial member of the union. If you're a non-member, which we call a potential member, there's no such thing as non-members, everyone's potential. We collect that information ourselves. We have 2,500 schools. We have a federation representative in every school who's elected. One of their prime jobs every year is to write down all the people that are at that school, members and non-members.
Well, how do they know who the new employees are?
Sorry?
John, so, like, if you're at a school, to start the school year, they've hired 20 new teachers.
Yep.
Whose responsibility would it be for your organization to know who those 20 new people are and to approach them to sign the union, and what part does the national office play in that?
Missed the last bit, but it's the union's responsibility to do it, and on the ground that would be the federation representative or the local field organiser or one of our project officers or really recruitment officers. We employ every year for half a year, for a semester, we employ 4 young teachers who are in the first 5 years of teaching, and we go and recruit on like gets like. They go into schools and they hunt people out. We also, because it's still a government department, the government has to produce a gazette that says, here are the teachers who have been appointed permanently to the payroll. So we harvest that information back into our membership system, and then we go and recruit them.
Right. So John, let's dive in a little bit to this next slide, talking about the direct debit implementation. You know, you had alluded to you guys doing this originally back in 2006 when the web wasn't, you know, a thing. If folks are looking for a solution, Bill Highway is definitely here to chat with you. But talk to us about the direct debit implementation, John, and what that looked like for you, and also what the challenges that people should be thinking through when it comes to doing something like this.
Okay, this took probably a year to plan and test before we went, if you like, to market, so to speak. We went and tested forms, we went and tested scripts, we went and tested everything. All the officers, all the field organisers and all of our office staff had to be trained in what direct debit was and what the questions members might ask. And we worked those through and we gave those to our officers. We then started training our activists. Now, the Federation has so much democracy at heart. We have 8 meetings a year of our state council. That's basically 300 people from around the state, and they're supposed to be activists. So we trained them, train the trainer model, so that they could go back into their work, their local association and their work site and be the equivalent of field officers for us. We also made sure we mimicked PRD. So that if union deductions normally came out in the pay slip on the Thursday, we made sure the banks were here to take that precisely at that time. So we would have less bounces, and what we mean by bounces is there's no money in that bank account. And so the bank then charges you as a sign-up fee. You either then got to go and get that back off the member, or you wear it as cost of doing business. We had to check the technology. We had to be able to go to members to say that the information they were providing to the union, whether online or in person, would be secure. So 128-bit encrypted, and our record of privacy of members' records held us in good stead. We also made sure, one of the big questions we're always asked was, when it's a payroll deduction, it's an allowable taxable deduction. Will it still be allowable tax deduction? We went to the tax department, yes, it was, regardless of payment, it's still a tax deduction. So that on the 30th of June every year, which is the end of the tax year for the workers who pay tax as opposed to corporations who don't pay tax, we generate what they're paid in that financial year via email that night, so they go and do their tax. We redesigned all of our membership forms so that the PRD option was taken off. That was one of the biggest fights I had in this organisation with people who were very good friends of mine, who said, oh no, you really still need this. We still need it as a fallback. And my approach was there was no fallback. And the General Secretary of the day supported me in that. And it may have lost us some members initially, but in the end it didn't. We ran a few trial programs in the field with live members to see if it worked, what didn't work. We get feedback and modification. So it's a bit like a lesson plan. Let's see how it goes and see if the students are going to participate. We got good feedback. We at properly planned meetings, 3/4 of the staff would switch on the spot. Most of the problem was that they didn't know their bank account, or they didn't know the BSB number. The most important bit of information you can get is their mobile phone number, or what you call a cell phone number, and the email address. Because in the end, don't leave them a form that's not going to be filled in. Get the form back off them, and then ring them at home that night to get the to get the bank account number and the account name type stuff.
Yeah.
So
John, I want to pause right there and make sure everyone wrote that down that's going through this. What John just hit on is extremely important. Making sure that you have updated email addresses and phone numbers is imperative for you to be able to make this kind of switch. So I just wanted to pause there and make sure everyone heard that nice and clearly. Sorry, John, I interrupted you on a thought. Thinking.
Yeah. So everyone in the building, there was no one in the building could say, "Oh no, I'm not involved in the switch campaign." We had made it the #1 campaign, and that was probably also its problem. In the end, organisers, and I've been one, have limited attention spans. They want to move to the next campaign. We've been doing this for 6 months. Can't we go back and do something else? Can't we go and do a salaries campaign? Can't we go and do, and there are always other campaigns that be fought and won. So unless you're going to drive it hard, there will be a trail off pretty quickly. So I don't know about other unions, but most unions don't have a long attention span on a campaign. We joke at the Teachers Federation that we are quite used to running 10-year campaigns. We're used to the long game, of class sizes and things like that, and we just keep reinventing the campaign over and over again.
Right.
And John, because we're getting towards the end of the allotted time,
yes.
As a result of all of these efforts, both technology-wise and your organizing campaigns and the back and forth, where is your organization in terms of membership now as it was before you had to deal with all of this? Is it declined? Is it increased?
We're now a much bigger union. We're a much bigger union that's still growing despite the biggest demographic change in our membership base for 50 years because of the baby boomers. Our problem's not recruitment, our problem's retirement. That's why we've also spent 10 years in a developmental recruitment campaign to make sure that we get every new teacher that comes in through the door.
Great. And like Ron just alluded to, we are here at the top of the hour, but John, if you're okay for a couple more minutes, I'd love to go over some of the questions here that we got from some of the audience. Is it okay, John, if we go over by a couple of minutes here? All right, great. Thank you for that. We do appreciate it. So Justin and Marty asked, and I just pulled up the slide about making a major upgrade to the payment, the online payment gateway. So now that you're in this world, everybody, of thinking through collecting, direct debits or bank drafts and credit cards, they asked, do you have many declined payments? And if so, how have you organized your staff to chase down those delinquent dues payments?
Yeah, we haven't had that many. What we came up with the view that the first time a bounce happens, we would pay for that and not debit them, not bill the member. We then, between the first time that happens, and we collect it fortnightly, between the first time that happens and the second time, the member must be contacted by phone or by email and told that their payment was declined. If it happens again, they'll be billed for it and they'll become unfinancial and won't get access to legal services. So we have a process, and it's a small percentage.
Great. And then, John, I had another question here for you from Dave. And, so that talks about the cancellations. You touched, I think, a bit about this throughout the presentation today, but how would you sum up what methods did the union use to encourage potential members to join? And this comes from Dave.
It wasn't through the switch campaign. Basically, the switch campaign ran in the background because it was just a normal way of doing business. It was, so a young teacher that had never knew payroll deduction it wasn't an issue. Our recruitment campaign was on the basis of like gets like. We would put young teachers in the field to go and recruit other young teachers, and we would run courses for them. We would have a developmental program that meant that the union was with them at work. The union provided them the professional development because the employer wouldn't. The union looked after them. Was essentially the message, and that you'd be mad not to join. And teachers have the highest unionisation rate. Teachers and nurses tend to have the highest unionisation rate in the country.
Great, awesome questions, everybody. And I see some more coming through here too. Just got one for Brian here, John. It says, do members agree to be a member for a fixed period of time before they can stop their payment as part of the application?
No, we don't have many hit and runners where they join, seek to get services and then quit. They have to, under the rules, they have to give us 30 days notice before resignation. Many of them don't. You just lose them and they become unfinancial. And if they become unfinancial for a year, we then lapse them as members.
Do you, John, do you have that on the sign-up form or wherever they sign up? Does it note that, the 30 days?
Yeah.
Is that how you communicate it to them?
Yeah, and we also don't, we've tightened up our refund policy quite a lot too. We were writing $500,000 in refunds a year. Well, we've stopped doing that by making it a rule that you've got this amount of time, and if you don't tell us, we won't refund.
Great. And so, John, just based on the fact that everybody's still here and we're still getting a lot of questions, we only got a couple more slides, folks, so we're going to go and finish this up because this is really great information from John here. So, John, you talked to us about the switch campaign. When we talk about I think I went ahead here, the phase one, you kind of phased this thing in that you talked to us about. Talk to us about what phase one was and how you evaluated this going through it.
We evaluated by the number of forms we had on the floor. And the feedback from officers that it went well, suggestions from them that make the form easier for them to use in the field. The slide up at the moment about the pre-trial, a PSU organiser is a post-schools organiser in a TAFE college, which is a vocational college. They're always harder to recruit in, they're always harder to maintain. They're a much smaller part of the union than the rest of the union, but we try to involve both schools and TAFE. It was a union-wide thing, and we didn't ask them to do too many visits.
Great. And so then, you had phase two here, kind of the launch, and then, eventually phase three, the rollout of the members. As people are thinking through kind of a strategy to put this in action, what kind of advice would you share with them in this kind of phased rollout type approach?
It was to involve as many of the activists as possible. So instead of having 45 officers in the field, the idea was to have 300 people who knew as much about the predicament the union was in and the way of getting out of the predicament was very useful. We had 29,000 members to convert to meet a 2006 target. We didn't do that. But you've got to set a target and you've got to set it high enough to drive everyone's attention. We then, in the phase three rollout, we emailed and sent letters to every member, so that the ability to have emails is crucial. And not everyone in the early this century had it. We made sure that the name on the bank account was important, and that the mobile phone and email address for follow-up was crucial. And it was necessary for them, if they came back in, to get someone to ring for the account number that night or the next day. And the campaign was everyone's responsibility, from the General Secretary up.
Yeah. And so everyone, I got the slide up right here, and we'll send these slides out so you can have this information, but some helpful hints for what John's talking about. So you'll also have this material. Well, great, John. So the final slide here talks about the results. You know, obviously this over a decade-long journey for you guys as of January 2017, and you guys are currently just above 77% union deductions not on payroll. Talk to us, you know, what does that number mean to you? How hard is it to get there? And just kind of generally talk about what does it mean for the union?
After 10 years, it's a normal way of existence. Every day when you log on to the membership system, which we have online as well, that figure comes up about how many people have switched, how many people switched in the last week, and how many people switched in the last month. And it's just a constant reminder that we're not there yet. Our big thing next push will be as the baby boomers retire. The baby boomers, my age, were the most reluctant to switch. The younger teachers weren't reluctant to switch at all. They thought it was a normal part of life. And the rise of online shopping is both a benefit and a challenge to us. A benefit in the sense that buying something online is no longer a big deal. It's the norm. But the challenge for us is our systems and the look and feel of what we're offering online has to be as slick as major department stores or Apple, because that's who we're competing with for the dollar. But for a young teacher, the idea that they'll pay a subscription every month for music, for other things, is pretty much ingrained. If you've got a Pandora account or a Spotify account, it's very easy to pay your money. The union's got to make it that easy. Otherwise, they're not going to be in the game for much longer.
Yeah. Well, John, great. We deeply appreciate you spending so much time with us today, and just by the sheer amount of questions we're still getting, and everyone's interaction, we could tell this has been a huge help for us over here in the States, and we appreciate your time. Let me just send it back to you, John, and any last kind of parting thoughts or words of wisdom as we're going through all of this from somebody who's been doing this for quite some time now.
It's corny to say, but it's true. Every threat is an opportunity, and you're now facing the biggest threat of the union's existence in your country. If you don't, there's an opportunity there to step up to the plate and play it pretty hard. My advice would be go hard. Go prepared, go hard, because you won't necessarily get a second chance.
Yeah. Well, John, I got a bit of advice from me one time when speaking that said, you'll know how well you did by how many people are still sticking around after your allotted time period. And the fact that we got almost everyone still here 10 minutes after the hour shows just how much value you've been able to provide to us today. So, John, on behalf of everybody, thanks so much for spending time for us. We're going to send this out, and maybe, John, if we get some more questions, we can send them your way, just to help some more of the folks out here and the brothers and sisters in the U.S.
The wonders of modern technology is only an email or a tweet away.
Absolutely. And everybody, Bill Highway is also here. We've rolled out solutions for several of the national unions here in the U.S. We'd be happy to talk as well. So we'll be reaching out and sending out the slides and the recording so you can share this. We wish everybody the best of luck. John, thanks again. Enjoy your summer day there in Australia as you guys are just getting started, and we're wrapping down here. But thanks again.
All right. Good day.
Cheers.